We are back, ladies and gentlemen, on the Majority Report. And as you know, the woods are dark and deep. We have many hours to go before we sleep. And as such, it is it's my pleasure to welcome to the program the Washington Post political correspondent, Dave Weigel. And Dave, you're in California right now, aren't you?
You know, I actually just got back. It's pretty easy. There's lots of planes. The only depressing thing is that you have to leave California when you get on them. But I got back to D.C. after about 10 days of heavy driving around very large suburbs, like the kind that 70 singer-songwriters wrote about and warned us about, that have only gotten larger since.
So, all right. So, and you were, I feel like I saw tweets from you literally like 5 hours ago or 8 hours ago.
Yeah,
So
I don't sleep very much. Yeah.
It sort of feels like you don't. All right. So you've been in California for 2 weeks. What was obviously it was the primaries, but what was the primary agenda? And I mean that not actually the primaries, but the biggest agenda for the Democrats in these primaries. I mean, go ahead.
It wasn't very complicated. It's expensive, but not complicated. They had some good candidates in seats where they had not competed seriously ever. I mean, like these are districts drawn to be fair, but they were districts where compromise has been made. So, you know, in Orange County had a couple of Democratic seats, but then mostly Republican seats, and then Hillary carried basically every seat in Orange County in 2016. So they wanted to just get decent Democrats into the November runoff, and I hopefully don't need to re-explain top two, because boy, we explained that a lot last week.
Right.
And that was their goal, and they succeeded. I mean, this was probably the biggest hurdle for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, America's favorite committee, over the last, really in the cycle. I mean, their biggest mission was not getting locked out, and they succeeded in not getting locked out.
So I guess there were 10 races where they thought that there potential pickups, and there was like 4 or 5 that people had some measure of concern that they would get locked out, and they got locked out of none of them.
Yeah, I just was talking to the Republican counterparts about 10 minutes ago, and they're conceding that they probably didn't lock Democrats out of anywhere. They got, actually the closest was, in the end, the seat that Democrats had stopped worrying about, which shows you actually how smart they were with their investments, because in the 10th district was like Modesto and conservative Central Valley, but with lots of Latino voters. They barely made the runoff because they had 4 decent Democratic candidates and 2 Republicans. And then in Orange County, there's basically a district that kind of covers Fullerton, has a bunch of college students. They got Gil Cisneros there in Dana Rohrabacher's seat, which was the one they were most worried about, really up until about 1 a.m. California time. Wow. They probably wound up getting this guy, Harley Rauda, who's a investor and former Republican who's become more of a progressive Democrat. And then in the 49th, which is Darrell Iss's seat, they feel extremely good about this guy, Mike Levin, who is an environmental lawyer, not with a ton of personal money. He's not the profile they want in every district, but who really impressed people, organized a good campaign. And the 49th is interesting because, as far as I can tell, this is a seat that stretches from kind of the La Jolla part of San Diego up halfway to Orange County. That district has never ever voted for cast more votes for Democrats than Republicans in a primary, and it did last night. It was only about 48% of voters voted for any Republican in that seat, which is insane. It was more like 63% just 2 years ago. It was 63% in the last midterm. It was like 53, 54 in 16. So more people voted for Democrats in that seat than when Hillary and Bernie were on the ballot, which is they're feeling really good about that.
Well, all right. Let me just reiterate what you're saying, just so that it's not confusing for people, because it is a primary that essentially has I guess they call it. I mean, they call it a jungle primary, but it's everybody votes. It's very similar to a general election, I guess, right? I mean, except for there are two winners.
It is, yeah.
And there are two winners, and so to have Democrats have that much more of a turnout than, that's basically what it is. It's just Democrats turned out in bigger numbers than Republicans, and that is an anomaly.
It's an anomaly, except it's repeating what happened in 2016. And one thing I kept hearing from Republicans in the district, they were more realistic than some Republicans you meet, like the president, who thinks that they're going to gain seats in the midterms. But they kept saying, well, look, Scott Baugh, who was running against Dana Rohrabacher and trying to lock Democrats out there, said, look, 2016 there was a decision not to compete in California. The president never came here. If it was up to me, maybe we'd have had some rallies, but that Democratic advantage is going to be hard for them to repeat. And they didn't. I think overall across Orange County, we're still waiting on final votes. It was probably about 50-50, or maybe like 52% of all the votes were cast Republicans. It should be something like 61-62 if they were back to the normal midterm turnout, and that is terrifying to them. They really were kind of hoping that Democrats were boxing themselves out. They also, the one thing all these candidates have in common in these swing seats is they've never run for anything. There is no Democratic bench in Orange County because they only recently started to compete there at all, and so they seeing that for them, I think has spooked them since it started happening last night. Because they're even looking at one thing we were all talking about in California at the end of the last week was you could track early voting and see what members of which parties have turned in their ballots. And it looked like Republicans were turning in at a higher rate. This is why Democrats were really panicking about that Rohrabacher seat for this reason. And in the 39th, they were panicking about that. It turns out, a lot of those Republicans returned ballots and voted for Democrats. So a little bit less worry about that now.
Oh, really? So the those early Republican voters had voted Democrat.
Some of them did. The Rohrabacher case is actually kind of the one I know the best because I went to that district. It's literally where the OC took place. It's Newport Beach and Laguna and Huntington. I went there last year for Memorial Day weekend, and Rohrabacher was totally convinced he had no challenge at all. And this guy Harley Ruda, who's now probably the nominee, they might be a recount. He was slugging away, raising money. And so Republicans were so worried about him that they ran this. They were running mailers and tweets and things reminding voters that Ruda used to be a Republican. He gave money to like John Kasich and the RNC and stuff. And the Ruda people think that didn't end up hurting them. There are people who, like Ruda, were Republicans for Mitt Romney and for other Republicans until Trump took the party over, and they've bailed. And going around there, I mentioned the show the OC. You see it everywhere. You see these pockets of like Teslas and Lexuses and people who've been doing really well and are mostly fiscally conservative, but are really horrified by, let's say, anti-gay policy, anti-abortion policy, and they seem to be converting in 16, and they stayed converted this year.
Interesting, and I should say these are not going to be. In some respects, we're seeing.
Yeah.
Are we seeing like sort of like a revival of blue doggish New Democrats? That's what this guy sounds like to me, right? Is that basically?
Well, that's what's interesting is that in some places they didn't always nominate the most progressive person, right. But the people who were not running as the progressive candidate were attacking pretty closely to the left. For example, Ruda, I remember one of the first questions I asked him a year ago was, do you support Medicare for all? And he has an answer I've started to hear more from kind of rich candidates. It was like, look, I've done business around the world. Those countries that have universal health care are more competitive, so I think we should be getting there. If you're a progressive, you're angry that he doesn't say, I'm going to co-sponsor 676 and have a hunger strike until it passes. But no, he was rhetorically for universal Medicare. Cisneros was also a little bit. He's really a former Republican lottery winner who became a Democrat. He's, I guess, the more attractive part of his bio that the DCCC loves is that he's a veteran too. He didn't say I'm for Medicare for all tomorrow, but he said we should expand health care. No one ran as a blue dog budget-cutting conservative. I mean, the exception, there's a couple of people around the country, like Jeff Van Drew, who won in New Jersey last night, is a blue dog. The Blue Dogs backed him. I sat down with another Democrat running Arkansas who's a blue dog yesterday. There's a couple of those, but in these California seats, it's like they made the jump not from right-wing Republican to blue dog, but from right-wing Republican to median Democratic member, to Tim Kaine, I guess.
Wow.
They went that way. Because I always ask, I'm always on the lookout for somebody running as a Democrat who's not a Democrat in any way. There were a couple of those guys running, and they just got smoked. I mean, there was one guy who I really came to love because all his mailers had pictures of him and Barack Obama just because he met Obama once. I was running as the fiscally conservative Democrat, the Eisenhower Democrat, and he got 4% or something.
Wow. And what do you know about Katie Porter up in California's 45th? Yeah,
that's another race that's going to be a test of one of my favorite things, is whether people in D.C. know anything. Because Porter is a attorney. I think one of the attacks on her is going to be that she's not barred in California, but she's never claimed to be. She's more of a bankruptcy, personal finance attorney who works around the country. She got in early as a progressive Elizabeth Warren candidate. She literally worked for Elizabeth Warren. Warren endorsed her. Kamala Harris endorsed her. And she ran against Mimi Walters, who represents Irvine, so a ton of college students, and thought she was just completely safe. That was another district. All these are talking about voters voted for Hillary over Trump in 2016. And so she got in early. There was recruitment that got this guy, Dave Min, who was also a law professor at UC Irvine, but was running more as a center-left New Democrat. And she beat him. She got into the runoff with Porter. You could already see last night some people in D.C. saying, well, boy, this is bad for the party. They're nominating somebody who's running on Medicare for all instead of somebody just running on the public option. That's where we're at now. And Republicans, even last night, I'm looking at my email now. That was a good 3 a.m. Eastern time.
Right.
We're saying, single payer is going to be, no, that's not going to fly in Orange County. They're going to try, but Porter is she basically has Elizabeth Warren's policies and is convinced. I mean, when I was talking to her over the weekend, one of her campus launches, she was saying, people here are much more angry that Mimi Walters voted for the tax increase, the tax cuts, because for wealthy people in California, they're an increase. Lots of those wealthy Republicans. And then on single payer, she's like, this is going to save people money. I'm for this. I'm happy to explain to you, boy, this is going to save them money, whereas my opponent voted to take your health care away or make it more expensive by voting for the AHCA. If you remember that acronym.
Right.
The American Health Care Act, yeah.
That was the rollback. I guess that's what they finally settled on, right? With and that was the rollback of the Affordable Care Act, but it was America Care, something like that. America.
I'm only disappointed the word freedom did not get tucked in there somewhere. The American freedom to choose American health care and stand for the Flag Act of 2008. But no, that might be what they rename it, because this is still something I hear from Democrats all the time. There are Republicans who insist they want to try to get another Obamacare repeal vote before the midterms, and Democrats are delighted because they think it would fail, and they think the best they were ever doing in polling was when people saw, a vote for a Republican equals ending the ACA. So they're like, bring that on. Let's
that's not going to happen, though. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, there's no...
Probably not. I think there is going to be a push in the House to do it again, and you're going to hear like Ron Johnson, Ted Cruz say they should do it again. But my only point when it comes to Katie Porter is she's saying if it's a choice between I support universal health care, let's debate how we get there, to my opponent wants to get rid of the ACA, she's like, I'm going to win that argument, even in a conservative district.
I don't know. The Overton window is one of those phrases that gets a little bit overused, but
yeah.
But it does feel, or let me ask you this. Does it feel to you, having gone out there and look at these campaigns, it sounds like what you're saying is that to the extent that concept is real, it's moved. Like the center of the Democratic Party has moved to the left.
I think so. And so this is rhetoric that I think for a lot of people watching the primary sounds like you're doing the work of the DCCC. You're being paid to say that everything's going great. It's just hard to avoid. I've covered this stuff pretty closely, and I have some questions I always ask people. And in general, I have not found any Democrat. Let's say the Democratic position in 2014 was often in a swing district. It was like, well, we all agree that the ACA is not perfect, but we need to preserve it. And there was nothing about expanding it or lowering the Medicare enrollment age or none of that stuff. There certainly wasn't a lot of Medicare for all. And so completely, like the candidates who beat like the Bernie Sanders pet candidates in a lot of places, they're at the very least, they're saying we need to get to universal health care. And so if you're a cynic, and that's I think a very good thing to be, you can say, well, what's my proof that these people aren't going to get elected and do nothing to get there? That's fair, but the window has shifted in part because Democrats have seen how popular it is to run on expanding health care. This Virginia, honestly, might be the biggest story of the month, where Virginia, after a big election for Democrats, even with Republicans controlling both chambers of the Congress, they expanded Medicaid.
Right.
Yeah, it's with work requirements, all that. But, like the AFP, the Kochs had been working to stop that successfully for 8 years, and the resistance just kind of collapsed. You're seeing the same thing in Maine. And so if you are a very cautious, I just want to preserve my career Democrat, at the very least, you look at that and say, gee, it looks like taxing rich people more to pay for more Medicaid is very popular. Like, whatever you think of the policy, that is more popular than, hey, everybody, guess what? You're going to pay a heavy penalty if you don't buy insurance from Aetna. That seemed to be less popular in the long run than, you know what, we're just going to make rich people like skip the one yacht payment so that you have free health care. That turned out to be more popular. I think that's why you've seen it move. Combination of ideology, combination of practicality, combination of just the biggest factor is just, wow, I win elections if I promise to give people health care.
I think that's just the idea that argument about electability has been sidelined, I think is pretty huge, because there's just not a lot of energy, it seems to me, on when you start, and I'm projecting out to 2 to 4 years when Democrats control the Congress and then maybe have also control of the presidency. There's not a huge amount of energy on we've got to maintain where we are policy shops. Right, like anybody who once you have settled the electability question, then it becomes an argument about policy, and I just don't think that there's a lot of sort of money pouring into the policy shops that are advocating I don't know we finally figured out how the public option would work, and we're going to save Obamacare. I don't know. I just seem that's going to be unlikely. We're not going to see that, I think, for a couple of years, because everybody is in sort of this policy stasis, because of course nobody's going to pass anything. But it's interesting to see that electability question be resolved. I guess the next question is, are people going to credit these moves on health care if the Democrats do end up having the big wave in November, or are they just going to say it was a generic wave?
I think it'd be hard to avoid seeing what they ran on. And in these races, Republicans are going to run against the threat of Democrats raising your taxes to pay for health care. Like, they were pretty explicit last night. I was, again, talking to Republican strategists when they saw that Katie Porter was going to win, and they're insisting, like, that's, you tell voters that she wants $32 trillion in spending on health care, and, she can't get out from under that. So Republicans are going to force the issue, they're going to portray the Democrats as radical, et cetera. Honestly, I always worry, wonder if I'm being a Pollyanna, because I look at the arguments and say, well, that makes sense, and then sometimes they're wrong. But one of them is that the main thing Democrat candidates are doing to avoid being tagged as liberal is just by saying, you know what, when I get there, maybe I won't vote for Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
And that's such a big part of the Republican campaign that I think they risk wasting a lot of time demanding these people go after Pelosi and not, it takes some doing to explain to people why you should be against Medicare for all, and they're not really doing that yet. They've got 5 months, but so far their messaging has not been about that. I think in part because they don't have a great health care response. So it's the kind of thing I think to be litigated in the elections. And then look, obviously, one of my favorite favorite, I always use that word sarcastically, Time magazine covers was in 2006 when Democrats win the House. The cover of Time magazine is not Democrats win the House and Senate. It's a picture of a blue circle and a red circle, and it says back to the center. And it's just about how the story of the election was these Democrats moved back to the center. And, the Rahm Emanuel was in charge, and there's this pretty clear narrative that Democrats had recruited a bunch of suburban businessmen and veterans, and they just want to get things done. Whereas Republican rhetoric, led by Trump, is that these people are all socialists. So, I don't know. I think some of that's going to trickle down. But I'm saying at the same time, there'll be Democrats running on what would have been very left-wing policies in 2016, but they're going to say, and then if elected, I'm not voting for Pelosi. And I feel like Republicans are accidentally letting them get away with branding themselves pretty effectively by just saying, look, that liberal you don't like, I don't like her either. And people are like, okay, well, you sound pretty good on this tax Rupert Murdoch more to pay for my health care, so you seem like a moderate.